we'd like to introduce yet again Alex LaPierre.
Thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming out this morning. It's so refreshing to see humans after 2 years of Zoom and all that kind of stuff. Thank you if you've traveled far too to come here to this presentation. I'd like to kind of do this in a little bit more of an informal way. I'm curious what exactly about the Moorish Southwest brought you here today, about Moorish culture, about Southwestern culture. Feel free to raise your hand or shout it out. Why are you here today?
Well, we love the Moorish influence in Spain and the fabulous architecture, and I had no idea that there was a Moorish influence here as well.
Yeah. Fantastic, great.
We saw a lot of the Moorish culture in the stands, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and how fabulous it was during the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Europe was in the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
It was prolific and how beautiful it was. Had no idea they were here.
Astounding, yeah, astounding. Anyone else? Linda.
We both recently read the Moorish account by Lolo Alami, which was a fictionalized account, but it got us interested in that influence from Durantes, the expedition that came.
Yeah, Esteban de Dorantes. Yeah, we're going to be talking about him. Yeah. Oh, great to learn you guys read that book too. It's a great book. Yeah. Anyone? From Morocco, yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting how he landed here in a very similar landscape, and we'll talk about him. Yes, sir.
I am from Morocco.
Oh, okay, wonderful, even better. And now you're in the Southwest, so.
Yes, I'm interested, and thank you for doing this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I am also developing a course at the University of Islamic Spain.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm an anthropologist.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you. Thanks for coming down. I appreciate it. Awesome. Anyone else? Tom, back there.
I knew that there were a lot of Basque influence down here, but
Yeah.
I never heard about the Moorish, so I just out of curiosity, I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, definitely. And the real one of the pointed things I like to make is the United States hasn't been a country for 300 years, and Spain had an occupation by the Moors for 700 years. For nearly double the time that over double the time that we've been a country. So you have to think about the cultural impact that made on the Iberian Peninsula, not just Spain, but Portugal and even parts of southern France as well. And it was all spanning. And we're going to kind of go down and talk about all the different cultures, the ways that they impacted the culture. And I like to start off with this beautiful drawing. It's one of my favorite depictions of what life was like here in the colonial New Spain. Of all places this was found, it was found in the State Library in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And it was found because this individual was a Jesuit missionary. He was from what's now the Czech Republic, but he was expelled in 1767. All the black robes were expelled from all Spanish dominions, and so they confiscated a lot of the stuff they had. And so this was some of the depictions that he had when he was actually in Baja California, depicting what life was like. But what's fascinating about this picture is that almost everything that's depicted has some connection to the Moors. And in the background, you see the Manila Galleon there, which was one of the reasons why Baja California was established as a colony. But it's really, what allowed the Spanish arrival, the Portuguese arrival to the far-flung corners of the world was the naval technology that the Moors developed, along with the Jewish culture in Iberia, in North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean as well. That's what enabled them to cross oceans, basically. So even here, too, you see what's called an acequia. You say that in Arabia or in North Africa, and they'll know exactly what they're saying because the word is exactly the same as it is in Spanish. Acequia is a water canal. It's one of the perfect ways in arid climates to really distribute the water efficiently. And then here you can see the plastered adobe and the exposed adobe. The word adobe comes from Arabic. This fashion of making the bricks that was brought by the Moors into Spain, and then from Spain over here into the New World. Here they did do mud buildings, but it was puddled adobe. So meaning that they would make a berm of mud, let it dry, and then put another berm of mud on top of that too. But you can only get so high in that fashion. It's really with the bricks that you were able to do bigger monumental architecture. And you can even see an African individual here that's holding an umbrella for this woman, a Spanish woman as well. So not only the cultural impact, but also there were people that were North African, there were people that were from that had Arabic bloodlines that also migrated into the Southwest, into Mexico, into Latin America as well. And we're going to talk about that as well. So to break down, to give you kind of a little navigation pass for this presentation, first we have to set the stage, right? We have to talk about the context, about its coming here to the Southwest. And so we'll have to talk about the geography, both of Spain and also of over here. And then we'll talk about the timeline. So we kind of talked a little bit about that, the 700 years. And we really have to focus on the old world history. You know, that 700 years that set the stage for the Spanish colonization for the New World, right? It's kind of, nobody really thinks about it this way, but Spain was colonized for 700 years. It was a colonized culture by the North Africans, by the Arabics. So it's a colonial culture that went on to become a colonized culture that went on to become a colonial culture as well. And so then we'll talk about where we can see these examples in the culture, both the material and the immaterial. This is the perfect place to start. Is the language. It's estimated about 1 out of every 10 words in Spanish has some Arabic origin. And it's interesting, one of the ways, the easiest ways to identify it is usually the words with the AL beginning, but also quite a number of the words with Z too. One of the features here at the Presidio, the fort, was a zaguan, and a zaguan is basically this gateway into, it was in the gateway into the protected area of the fortress. So it was an architectural element that you can still see in places like Morocco, southern Spain, and even Arabia. But here's some of some of the examples, like, Nogales mayor, alcalde, it comes directly from Arabic, alcalde. Alcohol, almacén as well. These are all words from Arabic. Almohada, pillow, alfombra, all of these words. This is just a small selection, if you will. So how did this story of Moorish culture arriving into Spain start? Well, it really started down here close to Mecca, where Muhammad was born, close to the year 650 AD. And of all religions in the world, it was one of the most quickest spreading religions. And I think the real draw was that it was a religion where it emphasized learning the language and being able to read the holy book. And think about that in contrast to the Catholic religion, that was at the time in Europe. You can see this kind of differentiation between the two religions. I see it so much encapsulated if you've ever been to Cordoba, if you've been to the Grand Mosque in Cordoba. The Spaniards, after they conquered Cordoba, in my opinion, they defaced one of the most beautiful buildings in the whole world by planting a cathedral directly in the middle of it, and it looks so out of place. But you see this very distinct architectural symbolism. You see the verticalness of the huge mezquita, the huge mosque, and then in the middle you see the verticalness of the cathedral, this very hierarchical church, right, that came out of the Roman system as well. And so I think that was a draw for a lot of people. And in Spain, we think that there was just these huge droves of people from North Africa and Arabs, and that wasn't the case. Most of the people that were Muslims in Spain under Al-Andalus, they were converted Iberians. 70%, 80% were. Whereas the people from North Africa, they were a bigger percentage of the Arabs as well, okay? So that's important to remember. And it spread from, around the year 600, 650, they were already at the Nile River, and then it spread across North Africa, and then it jumped here. It jumped right at the Straits of Gibraltar in 711. That's when they do the crossing of that and begin the conquest of Spain. And here we can see that a little bit more magnified in in the Iberian Peninsula, this part of Europe here. They quickly conquered Spain, and there was only a small part of the north coast of Spain that remained still in Christian hands. And it's from that area, that foundation, that the Spaniards would pretty much do, the Spanish Christians would do the reconquest, or the reconquista as it's been termed later on, more or less. The term Al-Andalus is a term that means land of the Visigoths. And the Visigoths were basically the people that sacked Rome in later the history. They were one of those Germanic tribes. And Rome said, hey, let's get them out of here and give them Spain. And so they ended up going to Spain and being kind of like, auxiliaries. So that's where the name Al-Andalus comes from. But in my research, what I found what was so interesting is that the first Spanish name for the Sonoran Desert was Nueva Andalucia, New Al-Andalus, if you will. And I think it's perfect because if you want to compare climates and geography, we're very much closer to the frying pan of Spain, southern Spain, than any other part of Spain. And so this trajectory from 711 ended pretty much in 1492. When an American hears that number, we think automatically Columbus. But you say that number in Spain, they're going to think of something else. They're going to think of pretty much the casting out of the last Moorish, basically the Nazari kingdom there in Granada as well. So that was the last area under Islamic control. But it's interesting because these areas, the majority of the Spanish colonial settlers, they would come from these areas as well, the south. That's where a lot of the sailors were from, in addition to the Basque. And so, the term reconquest kind of came later after. It was a term that Spanish historians came up with later. But because the reconquest was so messy. How many of you guys have probably heard of El Cid? El Cid, it comes from Al-Said, the chieftain or the lord. And he got that name because he didn't just, slash his sword for the Christians. He slashed his sword also for the Muslim taifas or kingdoms in Muslim Spain as well. And so it wasn't always, on religion lines. It was a messy 700-year war where, Christians and Moors often fought alongside each other. And as such, there was so much cultural interface. There were a lot of exchange that took place. And one of those exchanges is really in the material culture. And here we see basically a shield. That's a shield, the same exact shield they would have used right outside this door right here, the Spanish colonial soldiers. It's called an adarga. It's basically a rawhide shield. And the interesting thing is when the Spanish came here, their enemy didn't have gunpowder. So the technology they fell back onto out here was medieval technology that they had gained from the Moors. And so rawhide shields to deflect the bows, the arrows, except, not for Moors out here or Christians, but instead for the Native Americans, Apaches out here as well. And you'll also see here a lot of the tack too, these crescent symbols in the tack. You're going to see something shortly that looks very similar. But this first projection really starts with the arrival of the Coronado expedition. I mean, this is 1540. We're not even talking a century after the fall of Granada in 1492. They wouldn't cast out the Muslims in Spain until 1609. That's a couple years after Jamestown. And so there was very much a Muslim presence in Spain when all of this was going on. A lot of these soldiers had cut their teeth in wars in North Africa, in wars in the Mediterranean with the Muslims. And so the Coronado expedition came right through here. In fact, there was a presentation here, many of you may have seen it, with Denny Seymour. She believes to have found what will transform American history, if you will. Right here, just in our backyard, basically where the Santa Cruz River is a little bit north of the Mexican border here in southern Santa Cruz County. She believes she found San Jerónimo de los Corazones, which will be the first European settlement in what's now the United States, 1540. So pretty incredible. And that's not far away from 1492. So keep that in mind. And so my friend Lyndon Lothar mentioned Esteban de Dorantes. They mentioned Estebanico. It's interesting because you talk to some of the Pueblo tribes up in New Mexico, and they'll say, the first white man that I saw wasn't white, he was a black man, and he really was. Estebanico, he was a slave, and he was belonging to a Spaniard named Dorantes. That's where the name Esteban de Dorantes comes from, or Estebanico as he was known. But his real name was Mustafa al-Azamuri. I'm probably saying that wrong, but they were the survivors of a failed shipwreck. Basically, a hurricane hit an expedition, the Navarrete expedition, that was aimed to settle Florida. And it just wiped out pretty much the whole fleet. And the survivors, they kind of made these ramshackle rafts, and they basically kind of followed the coast from Florida along the Gulf, basically to the Texas coast. And then there, they ended up being kind of traded as slaves, basically, by the Indians, captured by slaves. And then after they kind of revealed some of their medical European knowledge, they began to deem them more kind of in the medicine men term. And so they gained a little bit more reputation. Eventually, they even had a retinue. They had a following of people that were following them throughout the Southwest. And where they were headed to was for Mexico. They were looking for their colleagues, their companions in Mexico, the next closest Spanish civilization, right? And so they wandered for basically 7 years in the Southwest, from Texas all the way through New Mexico, down probably through here, Arizona, down to Sonora, until they reached Sinaloa. In the northern Sinaloa, they come across the very frontier forces of Spanish conquistador. And they could even recognize them, but a lot of people attribute their survival to Estebanico, that he kind of had this desert understanding where he was able to navigate and find water and find supplies. And so very much so, he's credited with really exploring the Southwest the first. And what's fascinating is that the Zuni Pueblo actually has a kachina. It's a black kachina, and they call him Chacuaina. And one of the theories of his origin is that it's Estebanico. I mean, imagine him walking up to the Zuni Pueblo in 1540. You know, it's something that would probably stay in their stories that they transmitted over generations, right? And so soon after that, you had Juan de Oñate, and if you've been to New Mexico, he's a very important name there. He would bring the settlers all the way up there. And what's fascinating about the settlers that came with him is that a lot of the descendants, the Hispanic descendants now of those people that now live in New Mexico, with the kind of the phenomenon of all these genetic testing kits like 23andMe, a lot of those Hispanics are realizing that their ancestors were actually crypto-Jews, that they were secret Sephardic Jews that were fleeing the Inquisition. And where they headed for? The furthest frontier of the Spanish Empire to, you know, not get the Inquisition, more or less. But, you know, honestly, you know, there's this whole body of literature about crypto Jewish culture in Mexico, in Latin America. But what's lacking is really a body of literature on the crypto Muslim, the crypto Moorish culture here. And I think that really, that the fact that a lot of these Muslims in Spain were converted Muslims, that they had Iberian blood, that's the reason why that we're not seeing as much as of that distinction made between the Jewish and the Moorish cultures with the Hispanic body of Latin America, more or less. And, you know, a lot of these systems that were developed here in the colonies that we think, oh, they just developed in the colonies, right? No, they had 700 years of experience in colonialism. So they were being colonized by the North Africans and Arabs, but then, you know, that little strip in North Spain, when they were doing the reconquest, that's exactly what the Christians were doing. They were repopulating the South with Christians. So the Spanish first experience in colonialism was recolonizing the Iberian Peninsula. Then it was jumping to the Canary Islands, and then from the Canary Islands all the way here. And so a lot of the systems that they developed, like the encomienda system or the repartimiento systems, Those two systems were basically, the encomienda system was developed in the Reconquest because the Spanish kings, Castile Leon, they didn't always have the dinero to fund the military expeditions. And so what they did is they got, the lesser nobility to basically fund these expeditions into Al-Andalus, these cabalgatas, these cavalcades, these raiding parties, and to reconquer in the name of Castile or Leon. And as in return for basically carving out this territory in the name of that kingdom, they got concessions, right? And one of those concessions was the right to draw labor. And so the nobility would, in Spain, they were drawing labor from the Moors or the Muslims, the southern Spanish Muslims that they had conquered. And so what did they do when they conquered Mexico? They did the same system, basically, the encomienda and the repartimiento system. So it wasn't anything that they just invented because, we got Indians now. No, it was a system that had developed in medieval Spain, okay? And so I talked about this tack and this shield, and so let's take a deeper dive into that. So has anyone seen the squash blossom necklace? It's no accident that they got this crescent shape. Some of the first things they would have seen when the Spanish conquistadors were riding into would be the tack on the horses. And a lot of the tack on the horses was straight out of North Africa, because guess who were the best riders? The North Africans, right? And the Spanish learned their cavalry, they followed the North African model, basically. And here again, we can see actually a battle, and you can recognize the Muslims and the Christian forces here. They're probably, some of them are together and some of them are against each other, but again, we see that interesting bilobe shape of that adarga. This is in the Art Museum of Vienna, Austria. This is one from Granada, from the last battle that was saved. It was probably taken by the Habsburgs, the Spanish kings that were later from Austria to there. And then look at this one, that's from the Southwest. It probably was from New Mexico or here from Arizona. That's at the Met Museum. They're analogous. They're basically the same exact material culture. And then it's interesting too to compare the art too. I mean, when the religious art in Spain, they didn't know what like back in the biblical times, what the Jews or the Pharisees looked like. And so there's ideas of Orientalism, if you call it that, was, who was crucifying Jesus? It was the Moors, basically, in all of their dress that you can see here as well, the adarga and all of that. This is another one that was found by Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that's in the Smithsonian Institution. Another important topic is the topic of the castas. And, if you study anything about New Spain, you hear about this really kind of complex system that they had for, identifying all the genetics, right? A Spaniard and an indigenous woman, if they married, they would get a mestiza. And then they would have all these complex names for them. It's no accident that they developed this. If there was any country in Western Europe, any colonial power that had the most multicultural society, it was Spain. And as such, they developed these crazy laws of blood purity, right? And that's why the Jewish and the Moorish blood, and proving that you were an old Christian, that's a word that you see often in the medieval body of literature in Spain is they want to make sure that you're an old Christian, not a new Christian, that it's a recently converted or forced conversion in southern Spain as well. And so this complex system of blood purity comes out of that situation in Spain, something that England didn't really have to do because it was an island, right? And we can also see this if we compare the colonial powers. I mean, for the English, the 13 colonies, the indigenous, they weren't human. The philosophy was either kill them or get them the heck out of here. In contrast, in New Spain, they came from a multicultural society. They recognized the indigenous as humans. That's why they sent out the missionaries to quote unquote save souls in their best minds in the 1500s and 1600s. So it was quite distinct if you think about it that way as well. architecture. This is really where we can see, nowadays, 3 centuries, 4 centuries later, it's one of the few places where we can see that powerful symbolism in place. This is a mosque in Marrakesh, and this building is right down in Arispe, and it very much has the style of that minaret. And the reason for that is because when the Spaniards, the Christian Spaniards from the north, were reconquering southern Spain, guess what they did to the mosques? Sometimes they destroyed them, but they mainly converted them into churches, right? And because of that, a lot of the cultural trappings, the architectural motifs, the designs, the facades, that was absorbed into Spanish Catholic religious architecture. A lot of that was absorbed. And so some of those elements are like the false arches you see often depicted. Even the brick making. In southern Spain, it's mainly brick. You go to northern Spain, it's all carved rock too. The brick makers, albañiles, another Arabic word, they're the ones that really developed the brick making. And if you notice, this is a detached bell tower. So it's like a minaret in that it's detached as well. And actually, it looked even more like the mosque. This little stone pyramid was added in like the early 1900s. Take a look at how it looked like in the 1850s with that classic geometric, staggered triangle right there. So it even had a very much more Moorish appearance back then. And then check out from another end of Latin America, from Cali, Colombia. This is very much what they call the mudéjar architecture. Mudéjar is a term, it's a Hispanicized term from Arabic. It means basically domesticated one or those who are allowed to stay. And by that, I mean, who are the best craftsmen in the Iberian Peninsula at the time? It was the Moors. What was high culture at the time? It was the Moors. Guess what Ferdinand and Isabella were wearing when they gave Columbus their commission? They were wearing the finest Moorish outfits from North Africa as well. And here locally, we can see a little bit of that reconquest symbolism baked into the facade of Tubac, particularly with the niches. Here in the niches of the bell tower, you see that scallop shell motif. You see it you repeat it in a lot of churches like up here in San Javier. The scallop shell motif is familiar if you're familiar with the Camino de Santiago, right? The St. James Way, the famous pilgrimage in northwestern Spain. And a lot of theories about that pilgrimage, they say that it was perhaps a ruse because they were fearful that Europe was going to be swept over by Islam. And so they said that there was a story that under a field of stars, which is Compostela, that someone, a priest, found the tomb of St. James the Lesser, one of the apostles of Christ. And so, oh my gosh, we cannot let the tomb of one of the apostles of Christ fall under Islamic hands. So we have to defend it by all means. And so some people think that was a catalyst to get Europe behind, these northern kingdoms to take over that end of Europe from Islam. Oh, excuse me. And so the symbol of St. James is often the scallop shell. So you see the pilgrims, it's kind of proof that they've arrived in the northwestern coast of Spain. That's the symbol, right? And in France, they call scallop coquille Saint-Jacques, Saint James, right? And then you can also see in these ones that are by the window, the classic very Moorish peaked niche there as well. So very much elements. And then one of my favorite places in southern Arizona, Barrio Viejo. Here you very much get to, the feeling I get there is how I felt when I was fortunate to visit the Albaicin in Granada, Spain. These very, these thermal, these dense adobe buildings, these huge, massive adobe buildings with limited windows on the outside, but if you're ever allowed inside, there's this amazing interior world that's a completely private sphere. And you see this very much in Arab countries like this too, this dichotomy between, the public sphere on the street and the private interior world of the inner courtyard. And you see this distinction in this architecture quite noticeably in the Barrio Viejo. And you can see it perfectly in this photograph. You have this later Victorian butting up against this Sonoran row house here. And it's interesting about the shape or the morphology, the urban shape of average Anglo-American property lot. You build a building right in the middle of the property, right? And then you have the front yard, the backyard, and two little narrow side yards with little purpose whatsoever. However, in the Hispanic American and really the Arab, native North African Arabic model, you build right up to the property line. Why? Because the focus is the biggest room in the house, which is the open air courtyard here. And you see this, the Romans did it, the Greeks did it, and it was really the Moors too also adopted this style of architecture. Unfortunately, the Anglos never understood how this earthen architecture is perfect for our landscape here. They disparagingly called it mud huts, and that's probably why we saw in the 1960s the effects of urban renewal in '68, the destruction of 2/3 of this neighborhood, more or less. And one of the best examples where you could see this architecture is in northern New Mexico. This is the Hacienda de los Martinez. It's a wonderful place. And you see also the kind of the fortification element of this as well. Basically, the roofs, that's your gun platforms as well. And then you see the two interior courtyards here. This building probably wouldn't be out of place in Morocco, probably up in the Atlas Mountains or something as well. And here you can see the defensive morphology of the Alhambra, of course, in Spain, one of the most famous buildings, and for fortification. And then look at that's what's no longer there, unfortunately, in Santa Fe is the old cathedral, the adobe cathedral. And a lot of times I like to tell people, these missions here in the Southwest, they didn't serve just one function. They weren't just religious temples. They were basically fortresses too. And in North Africa, they also have these kind of they're called rabats, I believe, and they have fortified temples, kind of similar. Another thing too is the agriculture. The first tropicalization of Europe was brought by the Moors. They brought a lot of the fruit trees that we consider to this day, the Kino heritage fruit trees in this area. So the citrus, the quince was brought by them. The pomegranate, a lot of the plants we consider classically Mediterranean or Spanish, they were brought by the Moors here. And this is the famous Patio de los Naranjeros, the orange patio right next to the Seville Cathedral, which was built right on the spot of the mosque, more or less. And it's interesting because here in another arid climate, that this orchard, this citrus orchard agriculture is very popular. In fact, this is the coat of arms for Hermosillo. They have oranges and wheat, and even the baseball teams are named after the most famous agricultural products, the Orange Men of Hermosillo. And the wheat is another important subject. The wheat that we have, the Kino heritage wheat, is from North Africa. The breadbasket of the Roman Empire was North Africa. And the hard wheat, if you ever have a pasta package, turn it around, you'll see the durum, it says durum wheat. That's wheat from North Africa. It's the wheat that they use, that hard wheat, not the soft wheat, that they use for the hardtack, the lastum, and the voyagers coming over here to the New World. So that's another important thing to keep in mind. Look at this. This is a kiosk in Arivechi, which is in eastern Sonora. It's actually modeled after one that was in Mexico City, but it's just one of the most beautiful architectural examples of the Moors in Sonora. And here you go. This is a wonderful acequia image from northern New Mexico, and you could see the Arabic origin of the word. And I think of all the colonial powers. If you think about North and South America, who are the best equipped to meet this arid climate? it was really the Spaniards, and to a lesser extent the Portuguese in Brazil too. Because why? Because they had the oasis cultures of the Moors to fall back. That's 700 years of body of knowledge of North Africa and Arab lands that they were able to not only survive out here, but thrive. This is another awesome image from Pierre. She was a Czech guy that got his stuff confiscated. But in a horse rider, a good horse rider, if you want to call a good horse rider in Sonora today, is a jinete. But look at the genealogy of this word. Zanate, zenete, Arabic, and ultimately it's an echo of the Berber-speaking tribe from Algeria, who are known for their exceptional riding style. So isn't that crazy? A Sonoran horse, it has, the term for him is a word that comes to describe a tribal person from North Africa. Pretty incredible. A lot of the tack too, a lot of the words for the tack that we consider a classic American cowboy culture, it comes from Arabic words like hackamore, it comes from hakima, sakima, something worn on the head as well. There's a great True West, if you ever pick up that magazine, that kind of deep dive in all of the etymology of the tack for horse tack going back to Arabic words. And here you can see, this is a great depiction from an illuminated manuscript called the Cantigas de Santa Maria. And you could see, look at, these guys are partnered up with these guys, and these guys are partnered up with these guys right here. So like I said, it wasn't as cut and dry as we like to make history nowadays. And livestock too, you know. Unfortunately, a lot of the Mexican ranchers in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they were pressured by the Anglos to do the breeds that Anglos like the best, like Angus, Hereford, Charlevoix. But the breeds that they always had historically, they knew them as corriente, or runners, or criollo, Creole cattle. But that's the same cattle that came across from the Atlas Mountains across Gibraltar after 7/11. And they are the best adapted to this arid climate. And I was talking to a Sonoran rancher, and he's like, now it's crazy. First they wanted to force those breeds on us, and now they're telling us, oh, let's go back to that one because that's the cool and the hip and the in breed right now. And the horses too. I mean, you talk about some of the best riding horses, the Andalusian, they all came from North Africa and the Arab lands too. Even the Spanish barb horse, which there's a little, the Wilbur Cruz Ranch out here in Arivaca, they have a band of this Spanish barb horses as well. And even the churro sheep, I mean, all of us think about the Navajo rugs. Well, they weren't making those rugs before the Spanish came, and they weren't making them before the churro sheep came across the Strait of Gibraltar too, as well. And then also too, I mean, if you go to Spain, and if you go to Madrid, you're confronted with jamón, and it's for a reason. The food has become so much a part of Spanish identity because it goes back to the Reconquest. And one of the unfortunate ways that they were trying to determine whether you were actually a Christian was they would force ham on people. And even Lope de Vega, Shakespeare, Spain's Shakespeare, in some of his theater acts, he talks about one of the ways to kind of wade away from the Inquisition forces were to hang a hind leg of a ham in your front door, chorizos dripping the fat. Then they would even bother to knock on the door, more or less. And so that's why, because for them, eating the ham was so much a Christian thing. That's why there's museums of jamón in Madrid, Spain, as well. And then, if you look at Sonora, the wheat tortillas, if you look at these wheat tortillas, they wouldn't be far from a lot of the breads that you find in Morocco and in North Africa. It's really interesting, these really thin breads that you find in Morocco, and very thin tortillas de agua, as they're known here, tortillas sobaqueras. So there must be some connection there as well. And of course, the whole thing with the pig. But a lot of dishes that you have from Spain, they're direct translates here to Sonora. Sonora is very much a soup culture despite the heat. It goes back to the laboratories of Sonoran cuisine, the missions. In a mission, you have a lot of people. You gotta stretch it out, right? And so that's why soups became such a big thing. And one of the popular soups that you'll find in Sonora is cocido sonorense. But you go to Madrid, and what's the most famous dish? Cocido madrileño. It's a chickpea stew with meat. And it's a dish that wouldn't be far off in North Africa. Usually lamb, chickpeas, or beef, very much in that same gastronomical vein. And dessert culture. If you want to talk about Spanish dessert culture, it's a page right out of the book of North Africa in the Arab lands. A lot of the milk-based desserts like flan, arroz con leche, a lot of the spicing in the desserts, that would have come from the Moorish influence. And even sopapillas. I've found evidence of sopapillas in a Baghdadi cookbook from the year 900. And it sounds very similar, the saying of the word too. And so, it's interesting because this bread would have appeared first with oñate, right? And it's a bread that you can bake or make without a stationary oven, right? And this is obviously what the indigenous cultures borrowed from to make fry bread. Especially, you think about the cultures like the Navajos and the Apaches, they're big fry bread cultures because they were, not sedentary. They were always moving. I mean, they weren't hanging around by an oven, right? And so it's a very much transportable food. There's a town on the far end of the border that was in the news recently called Matamoros. It's right south of Brownsville. If you want to directly translate it, it means more slayer, more killer, basically. And that's the nickname that they gave the Apostle of St. James, the tomb that they found in northwestern Spain. That's because there's always these stories. I mean, there's even these stories in the Sonoran pueblos too. Whenever they were under attack by the Moors and things were looking bad, out of the clouds came this shining in the white horse, the saint, and he won the day for the battle. And so there was a famous battle where St. James came out. And so his name, Santiago, became basically the war cry for Spanish soldiers. It was probably echoed around here in this area too. But he's basically the patron warlord saint of Spain. And we really see this militant Catholicism come out of Spain because, it was a war. It was a religious war too. And so they brought a lot of that to justify basically the wars that they fought against the Indians here in the New World. And, from Peru, as you can see from this image, all the way to New Mexico. This is the centerpiece for, if you guys have ever been to Santa Fe, it used to be in a military chapel that was right on the plaza, but it's no longer there. It's in the Cristo Rey Church. And it's a beautiful Baroque carved altar. But the center niche is that patron warlord saint. And it makes sense because it was a military chapel. But what is he doing? Beheading Moors, basically, there. And this is the full altar screen. But what's really interesting too is that, how, as I mentioned, that a lot of the mosques became converted churches. They, in how they adopted elements, well, sometimes, the most holy place in the mosque is the mihrab, the kind of the niche that is towards Mecca. And they would even use elements to light up that niche. And so by creating windows in the roofs, and you see this, it's called a clerestory. You see this in a lot of the New Mexican churches as well. This lighting, focusing the attention not on the mihrab, but on the altar. And you see this Santiago. This is the famous cross of Santiago. Even the Duke of Albuquerque, who gave his name to Albuquerque, he was a member of that order, that religious military order. And another immaterial culture now to shift that is all these recreations in Mexico that you can find of the Moors versus the Christians. Almost every year there's some sort of festivity or dance where they're commemorating the Christian victory over Islam. And what these were was kind of this ritual drama. I mean, nowadays we have the TV and the computer to tell us what to think. But back then, basically, the Spaniards to prove to the indigenous that their way of life was the right one, that they killed all the bad guys and they're the good guys, was to do these ritual dramas, reenacting these reconquest battles in which they defeat the Moors. And so this is a huge one in Zacatecas. Like literally the whole town comes out. And I mean, their outfits are sometimes not quite historically accurate, but you get the idea. And another fascinating immaterial culture is the Matachina phenomenon in northern New Mexico, even here in Sonora. And Matachin is, it refers from Arabic, Arabic word mutawajin as a masked one. And a lot of the writers in North Africa would be masked. But here we see this ritual drama kind of symbolizing conquest and assimilation into new cultures. That's what they wanted to do. What was the purpose of the drama? And we can see it down in Puebla. We can see it. This is actually interesting because this is the one dance that the Native Americans allow you to photograph, because it's not a Native American dance. It's a dance that was instructed to them by the Spaniards. And here's some even historical pictures of them as well. And that crescent moon. Awesome. Well, that's pretty much the presentation, but I want to kind of affirm what Tom was saying in the beginning. We do have a special presentation come up on Bacanora if you guys are interested in that, and even a tour if you guys want to meet some of the distillers. We've got a gastronomy tour tomorrow if you want to join. We'll talk a little bit about the Moorish too. You got a little bit more time on the taco tour here, which will be a lot of fun. That one's almost sold out. We sold our culinary tour in Alamos, but we just opened up new dates for the spring. So if you check out on our website, come onto there. We just opened up a new trip with the Cananea, the birthplace of the Mexican Revolution. Fascinating place. We got our Kino trip if you want to see his crypt, and Casas Grandes. And yeah, I just want to thank you all for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Any questions? Yes, Connie, please.
Well, a very basic question. The word Moor,
Yeah.
to tribe or something more generic like believer of Islam?
Thank you. I actually wanted to say that, make a point to say that. So it's a word that the Romans gave to northwest Africa. And in fact, there's still a country named Mauritania. That's the name that they gave. And so that's the kind of the grouping that they've given for the North African, the North African colonized by the Arab kind of culture that came into Spain, more or less. It's a catch-all phrase. It's like calling, calling the Spanish in the 1500s. They weren't. It was a bunch of kingdoms, and stuff.
Is it a derogatory?
How do you feel about that? I mean, I've heard some people say it's derogatory. I've never felt that it's derogatory, but you guys might be able to better tell me that. So I'm not sure. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah. How do you feel about me using that term, Moorish?
So I think it's so the terminology also has a historical context, and as Alex was saying, it's rooted in the labeling or the assigning that part of Morocco by the Romans.
By the Romans, yeah.
But historically, it's derogatory term, particularly about what Alex was talking about in terms of these conquests and conquests, and even today in Spain, it's a term that it's a loaded term in the sense that it also captures the threat of the North Africans or the threat of Islam. So it just depends on what context. Yes, it is, in certain aspects it is, but it's also a historical
term.
concept.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. No. Yeah. Question.